Hi, I'm Larry Kavanagh, and I'd like to read to you a segment from my book entitled Nobody Here Wears Ostrich Leather Boots. The book is about a relatively young scientist at NASA who forsakes his government job with the space program in Washington to move his wife and family to a farm in central Virginia where he can learn how to raise cattle, grow crops, enjoy his children, and put in the barest minimum of time keeping up with the tiniest bit of research in the astronomy department of the University of Virginia. The story is at least 90% true. I am the hapless scientist here, and the only really smart thing I did was to hire a farm manager named Robert, who showed me everything I needed to learn. The book is available from Amazon, and you can get it in Kindle, paperback, and hardware forms at a very reasonable price. This is the first book in the Louisa trilogy. Louisa is a real place, although I sometimes think it's also a magic place. The first and third books in the trilogy are both true, and the middle book is a complete set of lies. Enough said. I'll be reading you the chapter about how we started our vegetable garden. So here goes. The vegetable garden. When we lived in the suburb metropolis of Alexandria, we didn't grow vegetables in our backyard. It was far more fashionable to grow azaleas, hollies, marigolds, and crabgrass. But on the farm, you're supposed to grow stuff that either you or the animals can eat. The vegetable garden that was laid out behind our house, as we found it, was 300 feet long and 150 feet wide, more than an acre. One of the first things Robert did for us, fully a month before the first day of the first spring of the first full year that we owned the farm, was to plow it all up and charge our account at the farmer's co-op with enough seed potatoes, tomato plants, squash, sweet corn, and other edibles to fill up the whole thing. He plowed it with his own personal tractor, since I hadn't bought the right equipment yet, just to show how much he cared. After a plow and a disc and a cultivator have been through a garden, there is, of course, not a weed to be seen. At that magic moment, you might believe that no weed would dare to show its head for the rest of the season. Right. The first things we were supposed to plant were potatoes, because you can plant potatoes long before the first day of spring. Robert had gotten us a 50-pound sack of seed potatoes. Here's what you do, he said, reaching into the sack for the smallest potato. Turn it over and find all the eyes. See, here's one, and here's another one. Taking out his pocket knife, he deftly cut the potato into several pieces. See, I make sure each piece has an eye. No pieces that don't have an eye. Now, you take the sack into your kitchen and cut up all the potatoes the same way. So every piece has an eye, right? Right. Every piece has to wink at you. Sounds easy enough. On the next 2 nights, we were consumed in cutting up the seed potatoes. You have no idea how difficult it was to find some of those eyes, to decide whether a piece had 1 eye or 2 eyes, whether we had cut through an eye or whether each eye was a healthy eye. At long last, however, we finished. We had 4 buckets full of pieces, each piece containing exactly 1 eye. The following day, we told Robert we were ready to plant potatoes. He sprang to his tractor, cultivator attached, and cut open 16 rows of deep furrows, each one 150 feet long. Then he jumped off his tractor and showed us how to place them at 12-inch intervals. Oh, but look, he said, you'll have to put 3 pieces into each spot because you cut all these potatoes way too small. Looks like you only got 1 eye in each piece. Of course, I said. We were careful about that. Not the right way. Each piece should have 2 or 3 eyes to make sure something sprouts. But you said each piece had to have 1 eye. At least 1 eye. Oh. Well, with Judy, Larry, and Maura all participating, we laid out all the potatoes in all the rows in about 2 hours' time. Then we sprinkled a little fertilizer in each row. Then Robert put his cultivator into cover-up mode and finished the job quickly. There was a nice little mound running down each row of potatoes. With a satisfied smile, Robert said, "That's it, except for keeping the weeds out." It looked very nice. That was about 1/5 of our garden. The next vegetable was green peas. Robert didn't need his cultivator because green peas are only supposed to go a fraction of an inch into the ground. Get a long stick with a nail on the end. Drag it down the row so it opens up a tiny crack for the seed to fall into. Easy. Except it's hard to walk 150 feet in a straight line. Maura tried it first and crossed over 3 rows of potatoes. Judy next, but her finish was 30 feet offline from the start. We had to revert to a more basic method of stretching a string from one end of a row to the other. This gave us our only true guide to scratch out the 3 rows that we needed. We scattered 1 pound of green pea seeds per row. We joked about how many peas we would get if the garden yielded a 100-fold increase. Next, as the season progressed, bush beans, followed by sweet corn, followed by melons, followed by cantaloupes, followed by green squash, followed by summer squash, followed by cucumbers, followed by tomatoes, and so forth, and so forth. This added up to several weeks' worth of work. Since we were also running a feedlot, we had plenty of manure available to enrich our garden. Unfortunately, none of it was dried manure, and it was all somewhat smelly. Not every member of the family was happy to help spread the manure. By about the end of May, our potato plants were several inches above the ground, but the weeds were taller than that. We armed ourselves with hoes and rakes each evening and gave the weeds our best shot for at least an hour a day. We began to appreciate how long a 150-foot row can be. We were not too bad at hoeing down the weeds between rows, but for the weeds within the rows, we were just as likely to cut down a potato plant as to cut down a weed. One evening, Bridget took her hoe down a row and systematically chopped down every single potato plant and left every weed standing. It was an honest mistake. There was a leafy kind of weed she thought was the potato, and the real potato she thought was the weed. Well, in spite of going at it for an hour a day, we were falling dreadfully behind with the weeding. Our shoulders hurt. Our hands hurt. We were tired. With our field machinery, we could tend 100 acres of corn for the cattle more easily than our manual labor could keep up with our vegetable garden. I asked Robert if there was a faster way. He said, "Oh, sure." Then he disappeared and returned momentarily with his little sputtering tractor and 1-row cultivator. He scooted down the rows with his cultivator, and the weeds flew. In the wink of an eye, he cultivated all the potatoes, the peas, the onions, the corn, and everything else. He told me he thought we had wanted to tend our garden the old-fashioned way, with hoes and shovels, the way his own father and mother had done it years ago. I could have wrung his neck. The garden that year brought us a mixed yield. We picked early green peas until our arms dropped off, then shelled them deep into the night and got 30 pints of canned peas in just the first picking. Our kids reminded us that they didn't even like green peas. But Robert became a taskmaster. He told us in solemn tones that we needed to keep on picking more and more because there might be a drought next year. Our tomato crop was more modest than the pea crop, because we had failed to set up a good strong row of sticks to hold up the tomato vines, and most of the tomatoes lay rotting on the ground. Nevertheless, it was more than enough tomatoes to take care of our needs. The sweet corn was nice. You could pick an ear of corn, shuck it right there in the garden, and eat it on the spot. I thought that an ear of corn eaten within minutes of picking was the most delicious corn ever. And, dear reader, if you don't believe me, I suggest you try it yourself. Just grow your own corn, pick it yourself, and eat it raw immediately. Of course, this only works if you personally grow the corn. Sadly, our watermelon and cantaloupe crops were dismal failures. We did marginally better with cucumbers and zucchini. However, we had a bumper crop of yellow summer squash. I mean a genuine, huge, enormous, don't know what we did, but there you have it, Brobdingnagian-sized crop of yellow squash. We canned 50 pints of yellow squash in the first picking. We gave away all we could. We fed it to the pigs, and the pigs really liked our summer squash at first. We gave them a bucket a day, which was in addition to what they were getting from our other unusual feeding system, which is discussed in another chapter. Plus, the 5 ears of corn a day that Robert was throwing to them. They devoured the whole bucket of squash every day for 5 consecutive days. Then, on the 6th day, they left a little bit of squash behind. On the 7th day, they left a lot behind. On the 8th day, they refused to come to the trough to even look at the squash. I tried not picking the squash. Thought my total neglect would cause the squash to dry up and die. However, not so. The individual squashes grew to the size of footballs, then the size of watermelons. I started to have bad dreams of giant squash crushing our house. Finally, an extended drought during the month of July caused the vines to wither and die. Thank goodness. Finally, the potatoes. You can dig up potatoes most any time during the growing season, but they reach maturity at about the end of August. Robert showed us that you need to dig carefully around the plant so as not to damage the buried potato. If the skin of the potato is broken during digging, the potato won't keep during winter. It's best to claw the hard ground with your fingers when you get close so as not to damage the skin. Since we were not that careful with our digging, we had to go down the row with 2 baskets, one for the good potatoes to be stored in a root cellar, and the other for the damaged potatoes to be eaten now. We were getting at least 1 bad potato for every good one. This was backbreaking and slow. We ate bruised potatoes every night for 2 weeks. Finally, when we decided we had to quit, we had 13 bushels of good potatoes and the same number of bad ones. As we looked over our good potatoes, seeing which were the largest and which were the most oddly shaped, I sheepishly asked Robert, "Do you ruin this many of your own potatoes? I mean, we were very careful, but it's so easy to scratch the skin." "Oh, sure," he answered. "Heck, I think I ruin twice as many potatoes as you do." "Really? You mean you mess up even more than we do?" "Mess up? Oh, you mean?" He looked away for the briefest of moments. "Well, you see, I don't dig them the same way. I just run the cultivator up and down the rows, opens everything up, saves my back, but breaks a lot of potatoes, but all I do is go down the rows and take the ones I want. I always have way more potatoes than I need anyway." Oh my goodness. That's the story of our first vegetable garden. In a desperate attempt to stay Robert's hand for the following spring, I planted 15 fruit trees over the winter and spread them over half the garden area. Maybe even that wasn't enough. Well, that's my story, and I hope you liked it. Once again, the book is available from Amazon, Kindle, softcover, and hardback, and you have a good day. Bye.